a mandatory medical exam, a hidden sniper scar, a dead Marine father with a legendary reputation, and a Navy medic who swore she would never touch a rifle again. That promise lasted 11 years, until a SEAL team mission went sideways, and one impossible shot changed her life forever. This story has everything: military suspense, buried family legacy, impossible pressure, and a woman forced to become exactly who she was trained to be.
It was a Monday morning in early March of 2025, and a waiting room at the San Diego Naval Medical Center held 43 veterans. Among 42 men sat a single woman, desperately wishing she could vanish. Sloane Catherine Barrett sat perfectly still, her back straight against a hard plastic chair. At 29 years old, she stood just 5 feet and 3 inches tall in her uniform. Her 118-pound body was forged from pure discipline, a build that made many underestimate her power. She wore her blonde hair in a flawless bun, exactly to regulation. Her blue eyes swept across the room, catching details that everyone else missed. For 3 entire years, she had cleverly avoided this exact appointment, using every excuse, from missions overseas to sudden illnesses. She had used every trick in the book to prevent a doctor from discovering the secret she had guarded for over a decade. But a new, mandatory wellness program for veterans left no escape. This was true even for a petty officer first class who would sooner eat nails than let her past be seen. The check-in screen cycled through the names. Johnson, Patterson, Mackenzie. The room smelled of burnt government coffee and the silent worry of men about to learn how their bodies had failed them. Veterans from the Korean War waited with shaking hands. Men who served in Vietnam stared into the distance, seeing things that were not there. Soldiers from Desert Storm shifted uncomfortably, favoring old wounds. The younger veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan could still pretend they were perfectly fine. Sloane's training kicked in as she scanned the room, a familiar and dangerous habit she could not stop. She spotted a Marine in the corner, shifting his body to ease the pressure on a bad left knee. A few chairs down, a sailor used a newspaper to hide his withdrawal tremors. Near the window, a soldier was charting all the exits and possible lines of attack. She recognized these signs because she lived them too. The screen changed. Barrett, S. K. She rose to her feet with a fluid motion, careful not to draw any eyes. 11 years of service had taught her how to become invisible when she needed to. She was the medic who blended into the background, the petty officer who never caused trouble, the woman who kept her gaze low and her secrets buried deep. But some secrets, the kind carved into your own skin, do not stay buried forever. Room 3B was at the end of a long, sterile hall. It was a typical exam room, with white walls that seemed to absorb the silent confessions of human pain. A blood pressure cuff hung from a machine, looking like a tool designed to squeeze out the truth. The charts on the wall showed the bones and muscles Sloane had memorized in medic school 11 years ago. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds walked in carrying a tablet. He gave her the practiced smile of a doctor who had seen it all before. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with some grey hair at his temples and a wedding ring worn smooth by years of nervous turning. He was the kind of doctor who was experienced enough to be good, but not so jaded that he had lost his kindness. "Petty Officer Barrett," he said, looking at his device. "Hospital Corpsman, First Class, 11 years active duty, currently with—" His eyebrows rose in surprise. "SEAL Team 3. "That is correct, sir." "And how long have you been assigned to the team?" "2 weeks, sir." Reynolds typed a few notes. "This is just a yearly wellness screening, part of a new program. Do you have any injuries or anything that concerns you today?" "No, sir." "Are you on any medication?" "No, sir." "Any allergies that I should be aware of?" "No, sir." Reynolds glanced up from the tablet, really looking at her for the first time. They assigned a woman who is 5 feet 3 inches tall to a SEAL team for full duty. Sloane held his look without wavering. "Sir, I pass every single physical test required by the Navy. I have no doubt that you do." He set the tablet down on the counter. "Very well. Let us get your vital signs. I am going to need you to take off your blouse so I can check your heart and lungs." Sloane's hand stopped just before it touched the top button. This was the moment. The exact scene she had feared and escaped in her thoughts 1,000 times. She had booked appointments in the winter to have an excuse for long sleeves. She had asked for female doctors, thinking they might ask fewer questions. She had created fake schedule problems to avoid complete physicals. But on this day there were no more escape plans. It was just her, a male doctor doing his duty, and a truth her own body would reveal. Her fingers finally started on the buttons. One after another they came loose, and she took off her blouse. She wore a standard navy T-shirt underneath, but it could not hide what lay beneath. Reynolds moved behind her with his stethoscope. "Please take a deep breath for me." She drew a breath, held it, and then exhaled slowly. The cold disc of the stethoscope pressed against her back. It was just a standard physical. As a corpsman she had performed this same check-up on countless sailors. Yet, being the patient, felt like a strange and deep intrusion. "Good. Let's do that again. Hold on a moment." Reynolds's hand stopped moving. "Okay." A heavy silence filled the small room for 3 long seconds, and then a fourth. Then came the fifth. Petty Officer Barrett. His tone had completely changed. The kind doctor was gone, replaced by a man with a sharp professional intensity. "I am going to ask you to please take off your T-shirt." "Sir, the heart exam doesn't normally require." "I have noticed something that needs a closer inspection. Please remove your shirt." His voice left no room for debate. There was no escape. Sloane pulled the shirt over her head. The scar was located high on her left shoulder. It showed a clear entry point on the front and a matching exit wound on her back. It was the kind of injury that told a complete story to anyone trained to read the signs of trauma. The edges were smooth, where military surgeons had carefully removed the damaged flesh. The scar tissue was clean, proof of the skilled hands that saved her arm, and maybe her life. But it was the incredible size of the injury that made Reynolds freeze. He walked around to her front, his eyes fixed on the mark. Then he did something unexpected. He used his fingers to estimate the size of the entry wound. He was mentally tracing the bullet's trajectory to the exit wound. "This is from a gunshot." "A high-powered rifle," he stated, completely certain. The entry wound. "It's from a .338 caliber bullet, probably a .338 Lapua Magnum." Sloane said nothing. "Petty officer, that is a sniper round. How in the world does a Navy medic?" The door swung open without any warning knock. Admiral James Morrison entered, and the entire mood of the room shifted. He was 68 years old, stood 6'2", and looked like a man who had been carrying heavy packs for 40 years. His grey hair was cut in a precise military style. He had the eyes of someone who had faced impossible decisions and learned to live with the outcomes. He was making his regular tour of the new wellness program, meeting the staff and shaking some hands. He was the friendly, public representative of the Navy's commitment to its people. He nodded at Reynolds, and then his eyes fell upon Sloane. His focus locked onto the scar. The world seemed to pause. Morrison's face showed 3 different emotions in less than 2 seconds. First came a flash of recognition, which was quickly replaced by shock. Then an expression that was a deep combination of sadness and incredible pride came over him. "Barrett," he said, his voice heavy with feeling. "Sloane Barrett." Sloane immediately stood at attention, despite not having her shirt on. "Sir." Morrison started to walk toward her. He was not trying to be intimidating. He was being careful. He walked toward her like he was approaching something very precious that was also extremely dangerous. That scar. He did not need to get any closer to see it. Its size and place on her body told him the entire story. Mike was the one who taught you how to shoot. It was not a question. It was a fact that carried the weight of a shared history. Sloane's throat felt tight. "Yes, sir." Reynolds looked back and forth between the Admiral and the petty officer, totally lost. "Admiral, you know this petty officer?" "Doctor," Morrison's voice was filled with 4 decades of authority. "I need 5 minutes alone with Petty Officer Barrett." "Sir, I am in the process of her physical. 5 minutes." Reynolds recognized a command when he heard one. He exited the room, and the door clicked shut behind him, sealing them inside. Morrison and Sloane stood about 3 feet from each other. The air between them was thick with things left unsaid. It was haunted by the memory of a funeral from 13 years ago. He was the officer who had given a folded American flag to a heartbroken widow and her young daughter. He had looked into the eyes of a 16-year-old girl with her arm in a sling, eyes that had seen far too much of life's harshness. "Mike Barrett," Morrison began, his voice much quieter now. "Gunnery Sergeant Michael Barrett, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, Scout Sniper Platoon." He had 78 confirmed targets, over 3 tours. He was the finest marksman I have ever seen. And he was my absolute best friend. "You were at the funeral, sir," Sloane replied, her voice soft but steady. "You gave my mum the flag. I was 16, just after my junior year of high school. My arm was in that sling. I know that scar." "You received it roughly 6 months before your father passed away. The official story was a training accident. A rifle had a catastrophic failure on the range, and a piece of it shot straight through you. You were fortunate not to lose your arm. I was fortunate to survive." Mike could never forgive himself. He kept saying he should have inspected that rifle more carefully. He insisted he should have seen the telltale signs of metal fatigue. Morrison took a short breath. "He also told me that, after your recovery, you gave your mother your word you would never handle a firearm again." Sloane's jaw tightened. Even after 11 years of therapy, of convincing herself she had moved past her father's death, the rage was always there. It felt like a piece of metal lodged too near her heart to ever be safely cut out. If he was so consumed by guilt, why did he redeploy? Why leave after just 6 months at home? Her voice was sharper than she had meant it to be. Morrison remained unfazed, because men like Mike are not built to stop. We convince ourselves that we are the protectors. We start to think we are the only ones capable of doing the job. We believe our skills are too vital to waste by staying home. He inhaled deeply. It is the story we repeat to ourselves so we can continue doing the one thing we are skilled at, he explained. And that skill is what got him killed. It did. Helmand Province, back in October of 2012. It started with a concealed bomb, then a full-scale ambush. He was standing guard for a patrol. He spotted the trap, called it in, and then stayed to cover his team's withdrawal. He took fire from all sides. He got every last Marine out of there, but he never made it out himself. The deep sadness in Morrison's voice was impossible to miss. His very last radio call was just 4 words. "Marines are clear. Out!" Sloane squeezed her eyelids shut, trying to breathe through the ache in her chest. She opened them again. "I enlisted in the Navy in 2014, 2 years after he was gone. I trained as a corpsman. I have put in 11 years. My service record is perfect, with outstanding evaluations and several deployments. I did everything by the book, exactly as he would have wanted. My purpose is to save lives. I kept the promise I made to my mother, and no one knows you are a marksman. Nobody knows that, sir." Morrison studied her face intently. "Until this very day." "What is your current assignment?" "SEAL Team 3. I was placed there 2 weeks ago." A hint of recognition flashed in Morrison's eyes, as a memory surfaced. Team 3 was my old unit 30 years ago. Your commanding officer is Blake Hawkins. He is a tough but fair leader who earned his way up. He is going to test you, but he will also have your back when he can. I do not require any special favors. Everyone needs an ally watching out for them, Morrison stated, his tone unwavering. Especially someone who is holding on to a secret like yours. Sloane, I have to ask you something. I want you to think very carefully about your response. She held her breath. If your team finds itself in grave danger and they need you, not the medic, but the sniper, the young woman that Mike Barrett spent 4 years training, the one who can calculate wind, distance, and the planet's rotation at 200 meters. If they need that person, Sloane, and the only thing stopping you is a promise you made from grief at 16 years old, what will you do? The question hung in the silent air. In her own reflection, Sloane saw the scar. A clean entry and exit wound, a permanent mark from the day the rifle gave out. The day she almost died while learning the very skills her father demanded she learn. I don't know, sir. Yes, you do. Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. You know exactly what you are going to do. You will do what Mike would have done. It is what every person in uniform does when their moment comes. You do what has to be done. The promise will have to be set aside, and you will learn to live with that choice. Because a broken promise is infinitely better than dead teammates you had the power to save. Sloane looked directly into his eyes. Is that what you did, sir? More times than I care to count. He gave her a humorless smile. Welcome to the organization that no one ever asks to join. We hold our meetings every night around 3 in the morning, whenever sleep just will not come. Morrison walked toward the door, then stopped and glanced back. Mike always said something about why he taught you to shoot, even with your mother's worries. He said, I am not raising my daughter to be a killer. I am raising her to be a protector. One day people will need protecting, and my daughter will be the only one there who can help. Morrison rested his hand on the doorknob. I have a feeling that day is coming for you very soon, Sloane. When it arrives, do not second-guess yourself. Mike wouldn't want that. Sir, Sloane said, making him pause again, thank you for coming to the funeral. It meant so much to us that you were there. He was my brother. You are his daughter. That means we are family. Morrison swung the door open. Stay in touch. If you ever find yourself needing anything, whether it is advice, a listening ear, or some help with the command, you call me. Anything at all. Do you understand me? Understood, sir. And just like that, he was gone. Reynolds returned a minute later, his professional demeanour perfectly in place. He finished the examination without another word about the scar and signed her off for full active duty. He sent her away with a stack of forms and a follow-up appointment she knew she would never make. Sloane dressed herself in silence, methodically buttoning her shirt, tucking it in, and adjusting her belt. Looking in the mirror, she looked like any other sailor finishing a routine checkup. But she was not. Not any more. Someone else knew her secret, and a secret that is shared is never truly your own. The SEAL Team 3 facility was located at the Naval Amphibious Base in Coronado, a rugged compound created from sheer hard work. It was enclosed by concrete barriers and chain-link fences, with buildings weathered by the salt in the air and endless use. The Pacific Ocean was only a short walk away, a place where new recruits are taught that comfort is an illusion and pain is a very effective teacher. Sloane had been on base for 14 days. It was long enough to learn the physical layout, but not nearly long enough to feel like she truly belonged. It was Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. The briefing room had the distinct smell of coffee, gun oil, and men who consider a 5-mile run a light warm-up. 12 operators were already in their seats. 11 of them swiveled to watch her as she entered. Commander Blake Hawkins stood at the head of the room. He was 44 years old, with a face that showed 2 decades of difficult decisions made in brutal conditions. His eyes noticed everything and forgot nothing. He had 22 years in the service, with 3 tours of combat duty with this exact team. He was the kind of leader who got respect simply because he had earned it 10 times over. "Petty Officer Barrett, you are punctual. Please have a seat." Sloane found a chair in the last row. It was the unspoken assigned seat for the medic, near enough to be of service, but distant enough to stay clear of the mission planning. "Gentlemen," Hawkins's voice sliced through the quiet conversations, "this is Hospital Corpsman First Class Sloane Barrett. She is our new team medic. She has served 11 years on active duty, with 3 combat tours, 2 in Afghanistan and another in Iraq. Her specialty is battlefield medicine and advanced trauma care. She comes highly recommended to us from Naval Medical Command." The room went still. 12 pairs of eyes were fixed on her, calculating her abilities against the team's potential risk. Chief Warrant Officer Hayes spoke first. He was 50, a former Marine who had transferred to the Navy for his own private reasons. They all called him Gunny, a holdover from his previous service. Standing 5 feet 3 inches, his voice was rough from a smoking habit he had given up 10 years prior. "With all due respect, Doc, can you handle a 60-pound medical pack plus a full combat load?" "Yes, Chief." "That includes body armor, with both front and back plates?" "Yes, Chief." "On top of your ammunition, water, and other personal gear?" "Yes, Chief." Gunny leaned back in his chair with a grunt. "We will see about that on Friday." Senior Chief Petty Officer Wade Hollister sat 2 chairs down. At 48, he was a man of few words, as though he had witnessed too much to waste any of them. His call sign was Stone, because his face was unreadable. He never seemed hurried and never cracked under pressure. Stone remained silent, just watching her with eyes that seemed to be taking her full measure. Petty Officer First Class Declan Briggs was slouched in his chair like he ran the place. He was 32, with red hair and a spray of freckles that made him look younger than his years. His voice carried effortlessly from 3 rows back. They called him Frost because of his icy calm during a firefight. At the moment, he just sounded unconvinced. "The last medic we had was 6'1", weighed 190 pounds, Frost pointed out, his doubt clear, and even he had trouble keeping pace. "No offence intended, but you are—" "Small," Sloane finished for him. "I am aware. I can keep up." "We are not hauling you out if you fall behind," Frost said to his friend, Petty Officer Dylan Garrett. "Just so we are clear on the rules," Hawkins cut them off. "Barrett has passed every physical standard the Navy requires for this assignment. She is here based on her own accomplishments. Her position on this team will be decided by how she performs. That same rule applies to every person in this room." He looked directly at Sloane. "Is that understood, Petty Officer?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Good. The integration brief is scheduled for Thursday. Physical training is tomorrow at 5:30 in the morning. The ruck march is on Friday, 12 miles with a full pack. Are there any questions?" There were none. Dismissed. The men began to get up and leave. Sloane stayed in her chair, faking a review of medical documents she had already memorized. Stone stopped in the doorway and looked back at her. "Barrett." "Yes, Senior Chief. Welcome to the team." "Pay no mind to Frost. He gives every new person a hard time. I understand, Senior Chief." Stone observed her for another moment, as if he could detect the secret she was trying so hard to conceal. Then he turned and left. Sloane was by herself in the still, vacant room. She thought about Morrison's words on promises, both the ones fulfilled and the ones that were not. She knew a choice had to be made soon. At 5:30 on Wednesday morning, the sky above Coronado was still dark. The chilly air was a quiet sign that even Southern California had its seasons. 12 operators and a single medic gathered for their training, a typical SEAL warm-up meant to filter out anyone not fully committed. The workout involved a 2-mile run and several exercises, all part of their normal combat preparation. Sloane kept a consistent pace. She did not run up front with Frost and Garrett, but she made sure to stay far from the back where others might see weakness. She ran right in the middle, her breathing even, carefully preserving her energy. She could overhear Frost and Garrett talking as they ran. "I will bet you $20 she quits during the march on Friday." "She has only been here for 2 weeks. That is a lot different than marching 12 miles in the California desert with a full pack." Sloane remained quiet, saving her breath. Talk was cheap. Only her performance would demonstrate her real worth. Friday came with a cloudless sky and growing heat for the 12-mile march, where everyone carried a pack weighing at least 60 pounds plus their gear. They were positioned in the desert east of the base, where temperatures were expected to reach 95 degrees. The team gathered at 6 in the morning. As the sun began to rise, the air was already warming up. Sloane gave her pack one final adjustment. It was loaded with medical gear like intravenous bags, bandages, and tourniquets, everything required to save a life when the body is about to give out. It had a total weight of 62 pounds, a heavy load for her 118-pound body. The first mile felt simple. The second mile was just another day at work. Around the 4th mile, her shoulders began to protest. At the halfway mark, her hips started to ache intensely. By mile 8, each step was a battle between her willpower and her body. But she had faced worse during medic training, dragging 200-pound dummies over obstacle courses. She had done it in field exercises, treating simulated casualties, while smoke, grenades, and blank rounds exploded around her. She had also done it on actual missions, carrying wounded soldiers who were twice her size because there was no other choice. She understood that pain is temporary, but the regret of quitting lasts forever. At the 12th mile, she finally crossed the finish line. Her final time was 2 hours and 41 minutes. It was not a record-breaking time. Frost and Garrett had finished 18 minutes ahead of her. Stone and Gunny were 12 minutes quicker, but she had finished the entire course. She managed it on her own, without falling behind. Hawkins checked his watch when she finished and offered a slight nod. "That is a decent time, Barrett." Gunny walked over and gave her a bottle of water. "You can carry the weight, which is something, but carrying a pack is different from being in a fight." "I understand that, Chief." "We will see how you do when someone is shooting at you." Monday was reserved for weapons qualification. The shooting range was set up 20 meters inland, far from the public and any potential noise issues. They had targets placed at 50, 100, and 300 meters. The air smelled strongly of gunpowder and hot metal, filled with the loud crack of gunfire. Sloane was only permitted to qualify with the Beretta M9 pistol. Her official duty as a corpsman did not require rifle skills. Medics were armed with pistols for personal defense, not for offensive combat. She shot 40 rounds and landed 40 hits. She earned the rank of expert marksman. Gunny watched from the observation booth, raising an eyebrow at the tight grouping of her shots. "The Doc is a fantastic shot with a pistol." Hawkins nodded in agreement and made a note. That could come in handy if the enemy ever gets too close. The operators then started their rifle qualifications. They used M4 carbines first, then moved to the main weapon, the M40A5 sniper rifle. Sloane stayed behind the firing line, officially just observing, but inside her mind she was remembering. That rifle felt deeply familiar to her. It was the same type her father had used, with the same stock and scope. It had the same weight and balance. Her fingers started to move instinctively, a conditioned response from many hours of practice. She could almost feel the desert ground in New Mexico as her father's voice guided her on judging the wind. He had instructed her to match her breathing to the rhythm of her own heart. Stone was taking aim at a target 600 meters away. It was a standard NATO target, the size of a person's chest. His first shot missed, hitting 8 inches to the left. Sloane's lips moved as she whispered, so softly it was almost silent. "If the shot goes left, adjust your right shoulder." Stone made the small adjustment. His following shot was a perfect bullseye. Senior Chief Wade Hollister stood just 5 feet from Sloane, near enough to hear her quiet tip. He turned his head just a bit, and their eyes locked. Sloane immediately looked away, but the moment had passed. Stone shot 4 more times, and each one hit the center perfectly. For a 600-meter distance, it was a very impressive performance. When he finished, Stone passed by Sloane and leaned in to speak privately. "Thanks for the tip on the wind, Doc." Sloane kept her face blank and said nothing, but Stone knew she understood. Men like him paid attention to those small details and remembered them. Thursday afternoon was set aside for a medical drill focused on combat casualty care. This was the test that showed who just read the books and who had treated real wounds under fire. The training scenario involved an explosion from a makeshift bomb. There were 2 victims with incredibly realistic injuries and a shortage of medical supplies. The intense environment was made even more stressful by an instructor firing blank shots and setting off smoke grenades. Sloane operated on pure instinct and training. The first victim had a severed femoral artery causing massive bleeding. She had roughly 90 seconds before he went into shock, and maybe 2 minutes before he would be gone. Her hands moved with practiced speed. She grabbed a tourniquet from her pack and tied it high up on the thigh, far above the wound. She wrapped it once and passed it through the buckle, then put in the tightening rod. She started to twist it hard. The first victim began to yell, a convincing act from the person playing the role. Sloane kept twisting. Each rotation tightened the band, clamping down on the artery and slowing the heavy bleeding to a trickle. 3 twists, then a 4th. The bleeding came to a complete stop. The entire process took her only 19 seconds from the moment she saw the wound. The official procedure gave a 30-second window. The second victim had a collapsed lung due to air trapped in his chest. It was a deadly injury that was slowly cutting off his air supply. She needed to perform a needle decompression. She found the right spot between the ribs, directly on the mid-clavicular line, and pulled out a 14-gauge needle. She felt for the exact spot through the training uniform, double-checked the position, and pushed the needle through. A faint pop was followed by a hiss as the trapped air rushed out. The pressure was released, and the patient could breathe freely again. She quickly set up an intravenous line, even as the instructor kept up his simulated attack. She then packed other wounds with combat gauze and gave him morphine for the pain. She accomplished all of this while thick smoke clouded her vision and the noise of blank gunfire echoed all around her. After the drill was over, Gunny walked up to examine the patients. He reviewed her work and her timing. "That was damn impressive, Doc. The best I've ever seen from a new medic." Hawkins nodded to show he agreed. Barrett is extremely good at her job. Frost stood a short distance away with his arms crossed, watching her with a skeptical look. "It is good to have medical skills. They are vital. But we need operators who can fight back when things get dangerous. A combat medic is not the same thing as a combat operator." He spoke loud enough for everyone on the training field to hear him, making sure his words reached her. Sloane heard him and stored the comment away as information. She did not feel angry or hurt. It was just another piece of data. She understood their worries. They had lost medics before. They were good, brave men. These were medics who were masters at saving lives, but could not defend themselves when under attack. During a gunfight, they became a liability to be protected rather than an asset. They were all wondering the same thing every team wonders about a new person. Are you going to be the reason we get killed? It was a fair question, and she knew she could not answer it with words. She would have to answer it with her actions, and those actions would be put to the test much sooner than any of them expected. The team got their mission briefing on Friday afternoon. They all met in the classified strategy room. The walls were covered with screens showing satellite images and maps with global positioning system data. There were also intelligence reports from sources that Sloane was not even cleared to know about. Hawkins was at the front of the room, holding a small remote control. He had a very serious expression on his face. "Gentlemen, Doc, we are deploying Monday at 4 in the morning. Our final destination is classified until we are in the air. We have a rescue mission." 2 American contractors, who were working as civilian security, were captured 6 days ago near the Syrian and Iraqi border. Our most recent intelligence shows they are being held in this compound. The image on the screen switched. On the screen, a lonely village appeared, a small cluster of buildings in a vast, empty desert. A single dusty road was the only way in or out. "We estimate between 8 and 12 hostiles," the commander began. "They are a mix of local militia and foreign fighters, all of them armed and highly motivated." He paused. "The civilians we are rescuing are extremely important. The government wants them back safely. Our only job is to get our people out," Hawkins stated, pointing to a map on the screen. He outlined the mission plan and their route. "We will make our move at 2200 hours tonight. We'll approach on foot, starting 2 kilometers north of the village. Stone, you will take that ridge and provide sniper cover from 800 meters. The 6-man team goes in and brings our people home. After that, we fall back to the main extraction point." "You have a strict 90-minute window on the ground," he warned. Frost then raised his hand. "Sir, what is the doc's assignment?" Hawkins's eyes shifted to Sloane. "Barrett will remain here at base camp with the communications equipment. This is standard procedure for a new corpsman on their first mission. She will monitor the radio and be ready if we take any casualties." Sloane had expected this. It was the logical and safe choice. But a voice in her head, one that sounded just like her father, whispered, "Asterisk. They do not trust you. You have to earn it." Asterisk. Hawkins then turned his focus back to her. "Your responsibility is medical preparation. I need you ready for the worst-case scenario. That includes gunshot wounds, shrapnel, burns, or anyone who succumbs to the heat. The final team briefing is Monday morning before we leave. We will cover medical plans and check our gear then." "Yes, sir. Are there any further questions?" Hawkins scanned the room, which was completely still. "Good. Medical brief is at 0700 on Monday. Gear inspection is at 0800. We will walk through the plan at 0900. The full practice run is at 1300. Get some rest. Our work begins on Monday. Dismissed." The team members started to get up and leave the room. The relaxed chatter from before the meeting had completely vanished. The mission was suddenly very real. The men were now in their serious operational mode. Stone was the final person to leave. He approached Sloane as she was packing up her computer and notes. "Barrett." "Yes, Senior Chief." "Have you actually been in a war zone before?" he asked. "I mean real action, not just a training simulation." 3 tours, Senior Chief. I completed 2 in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. Each one was 6 months long. But did you see any fighting, or were you stationed on a large safe base? I treated wounded soldiers just back from firefights. Our small base was hit with mortars on 2 different occasions. I also joined 3 convoy missions where we were struck by explosives and received enemy fire both times. Stone nodded slowly as he processed her answer. He seemed to think to himself, Monday might not go as she expects. A base camp is not always a safe place, he said aloud. How skilled are you with that Mine 9 pistol you carry? Very skilled, Senior Chief. Good. Keep it on you at all times. He began to walk away, but then he paused. That wind adjustment you called on the rifle range. For 600 meters, an 8-inch correction. You made that call very fast. Sloane met his look head-on. It was simple observation, Senior Chief. I was just watching the flags and the heat rising off the ground. I see. Observation, Stone said, his face revealing nothing. Keep observing, Doc. Sometimes noticing the little things is what keeps us all breathing. With that, he left her alone in the quiet room. She gazed at the satellite image on the large screen. It was the building where everything was about to change in just 3 days, a place where old promises would have to face a new reality. Her hand drifted to her shoulder, feeling the slight ridge of a scar through the fabric of her uniform. She had lived with a promise for 11 years. In 3 days that promise would be challenged. She was not sure if she could follow through, but she could still hear her father's words. He had already provided the answer. Some promises are made to be kept forever. Others are made to be broken when the moment is right. Monday would determine what kind of promise she had made. The C-130 cargo plane landed at a secret forward base. It was in a part of the world somewhere between Syria and places you cannot find on a map. The temperature was a searing 118 degrees. The desert air was like breathing from an oven. Sloane walked down the ramp with 62 pounds of medical supplies on her back. The heat was a heavy, physical force. The team moved with well-rehearsed precision, checking their gear and weapons. It was a familiar ritual for men who had done this so many times it was muscle memory. She found a small bit of shade by a concrete wall. She took a drink of water. Then she inspected her medical pack for the 3rd time. Every piece of equipment was in its designated place. She laid out the instruments of her profession: tourniquets, gauze for heavy bleeding, intravenous kits, chest seals, and morphine. Inside a tent that smelled of diesel fuel and fine dust, Hawkins shared the latest intelligence. The report was not good. Their targets were confirmed at the site, but there were now 15 to 20 guards. This was significantly more than they had prepared for. Still, the mission was proceeding. When Hawkins asked for questions, Stone inquired about the route through Exville. The primary landing area for the helicopter would not change. The backup location was 3 kilometers to the north in case their position was discovered. The helicopter would arrive 30 minutes after they made the call. The rules for engagement were simple. Any aggressive action was to be treated as a hostile threat. Their mission was to rescue the targets and protect their team, using only the force that was absolutely necessary. Hawkins looked at each team member and said, "This is a rescue, not revenge. We go in, we get our people, and we leave quietly." The briefing went over schedules, emergency signals, and radio procedures. Sloane memorized every last detail. Her job was clear. She would stay at the camp, listen to the radio, and be prepared for any injuries. It was a safe, low-threat role for the new medic. However, she was well aware that in war, situations rarely remain simple for long. The team departed at 0400 hours in a line of 6 vehicles, moving toward a staging area 12 kilometers from their goal. The terrain looked like the surface of another planet. There was only red dirt, rocky outcrops, and a shimmering heat that made the horizon appear to melt. Sloane sat in the 3rd vehicle, facing Frost and Garrett. Nobody said a word. Each face was a picture of intense concentration. The friendly men she knew had been replaced by focused warriors. At the staging area, the vehicles were arranged in a defensive circle and concealed with camouflage netting. The team quickly moved to establish defensive lookouts. This would be their command center, the place where Sloane would have to wait while her colleagues performed the dangerous work. As she started to lay out the aid station, Stone came over. He held his M4A5 rifle with a comfort that made it look like a part of him. He was the first to speak. "How are you holding up, Doc?" "I am managing, Senior Chief," she answered. "This heat is intense." Stone just gave a slight nod. His eyes shifted to the medical supplies she had arranged on a blanket. He noticed the perfect organization, with every tool positioned for quick access. "You have done this before," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "This is my third tour, Senior Chief. The location may change, but the job is always the same." She had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, handling everything from shrapnel wounds and injuries, from bomb blasts to soldiers wounded in gun battles. Sloane looked him directly in the eyes. "I have seen what it looks like when everything goes wrong." Stone was silent for a moment. Then he posed a question that surprised her. "What are your thoughts on the plan?" Senior operators did not ask medics for their tactical assessment. "I believe 15 to 20 hostiles is a large number for a 7-man team," she said with honesty. "Yes," Stone replied, his eyes looking toward the far-off, invisible target. "It is." He walked away, leaving Sloane with the strong impression that she had just passed a critical evaluation. The sun blazed its path across the sky. The temperature climbed to 122 degrees. Sloane disciplined herself to drink water and take electrolyte tablets. She monitored her own physical state as closely as she would a patient's. At 1600 hours, Petty Officer Dylan Garrett stumbled while walking by his vehicle. Sloane's head immediately snapped up. Her medical training took over before she could even process the thought. Garrett was 24 years old, a powerful operator with no known health problems. But at that instant his face was bright red. He was no longer sweating, and his skin was completely dry despite the suffocating heat. These were the textbook indicators of a critical, life-threatening emergency. Sloane crossed the distance between them in 4 fast steps. "Garrett, sit down," he muttered. "I am fine, Doc," she responded with authority. "Sit down now." The sharp command in her voice startled him into obedience. Sloane took out her thermometer and checked his pulse, his skin, and his level of alertness. His pulse was a fast 130, but it felt weak. His skin was dangerously hot and dry, and his pupils were slightly dilated. This was not simply heat exhaustion, this was heat stroke, the kind of medical event that can kill a person in just a few minutes. "Chief Hayes!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the camp's quiet. The gunny rushed to their side. "What is happening here?" "It is heat stroke," Sloane stated urgently. "His core temperature is likely 105 or higher. He needs intravenous fluids right away, and we have to cool him down this instant." The gunny looked at Garrett, then glanced back at Sloane with clear disbelief. "Are you certain? He seemed perfectly fine just 10 minutes ago," Sloane replied. "Heat stroke can happen in a flash. He is not sweating, which is a very bad sign. We have about 10 minutes before he could have seizures, or worse." Sloane was already setting up the intravenous equipment. "I need someone to get Commander Hawkins. The mission must be delayed until Garrett is stable." The gunny did not protest. He hurried to find the commander. Sloane smoothly inserted the intravenous needle into a prominent vein. Saline fluid started to flow into him. She dunked several towels in a cooler of ice water and draped them on Garrett's neck, under his arms, and on his groin, where large blood vessels are close to the surface. Frost ran up with more water. "How can I help?" he asked. "Keep these towels cold and soaked. Swap them out every 2 minutes. We have to lower his body temperature slowly. If we do it too fast, it can create other complications." Hawkins arrived at the scene. Sloane explained her findings. "It is heat stroke, sir. Garrett requires at least 30 minutes of medical care before we can move him. I strongly advise we postpone our departure." Hawkins studied Garrett carefully. The young soldier's skin tone was already looking better as the intravenous fluids started to take effect. "What do you expect his condition to be in 30 minutes?" he asked Sloane. "If this treatment is successful, he will be awake and stable, but in no condition for combat. My recommendation is that he remains at base camp." "Are you able to manage his care here?" Hawkins questioned. "Yes, sir," she confirmed. "That sounds much better than trying to move him now," Hawkins decided. "We will push our departure back by 45 minutes. Garrett stays here. Barrett, you will be in charge of him." "Yes, sir." The team accepted the revised plan without a single complaint. They all knew what the desert heat was capable of and how quickly it could become deadly. About 30 minutes later, Garrett was sitting up and sipping water by himself. His skin had returned to its normal color as his body temperature finally decreased. He looked over at Sloane, his face full of embarrassment. "I am sorry, Doc." "You have no reason to be sorry. The heat does not care how tough you think you are." "How did you even know something was wrong?" Garrett wondered. "I barely felt sick before you started checking on me." "It comes from a mix of training, experience, and paying very close attention," Sloane answered, taking his vitals one more time. "You had stopped sweating, your skin was pale, and your walk was unsteady. Those were all the clues I needed." Frost crouched down next to them. "I was standing right beside him, and I did not see any of that." "We are trained for different things," Sloane said with a small shrug. A little while later, as the team got ready to leave, the gunny came over to her. "You might have just saved his life, Doc." "I was only doing my job, Chief." "Most medics would not have seen the problem until he was on the ground," he told her. There was a new tone of respect in the gunny's voice that she had never heard before. "You have some incredibly sharp eyes." The team finally left at 5:30 that evening. Sloane watched them melt into the desert landscape. There were 7 operators, each one moving like a shadow. Stone was on his rifle, Hawkins led the way, and Frost and the others formed a perfect tactical formation. She was now alone with Garrett and the drivers. Her only link to the events unfolding in the vast desert was the radio. Sloane got comfortable and began to wait. Waiting was a huge part of being a combat medic, and it was often the most difficult part. She knew that people she cared about were walking into danger, and she could do absolutely nothing to help them until they brought the wounded back. If they were able to bring them back, at 7 in the evening, the gunny's voice came over the radio. "Base, this is Entry 1. We are 2 kilometers away from the target. Chief Hayes is walking with a limp. I need the doc's opinion." Sloane pressed the microphone button. The chief explained the pain. "I twisted my ankle when I crossed a dry riverbed. I am fine." "Can you put your full weight on it?" Sloane asked. "Yes." "Does it hurt more when you push off with your foot, or when you step down on it?" There was a short silence. "When I push off, can you see any swelling, or feel any?" After a longer pause, Sloane closed her eyes. She could picture the injury perfectly in her head. It was a grade 2 sprain of the ankle, maybe even a grade 3. It was the type of injury you could ignore with enough adrenaline, but it was also the type that could fail at the worst possible time. "Commander Hawkins, this is Barrett. I advise that Chief Hayes be put on a different task. That ankle could give out during close quarters combat. He needs to avoid any quick side-to-side movements or sprinting," Hawkins's voice replied. "I understand. Hayes, you are now on security duty. You will not enter the building." The chief protested. "Sir, I am still able to." "This is not a discussion, Chief." The gunny's frustration was clear even over the radio static, but he obeyed the order. Sloane let go of the microphone button and looked at Garrett, who had been listening from his cot. "You just took Gunny Hayes out of the main fight," Garrett said in a low voice. "He's not going to like that," Sloane answered. "I would rather have him angry with me than have his ankle give out in a hallway and cause someone else to get killed." That is a good point, Garrett had to agree. By 8 in the evening, the sky was pitch black. All radio chatter stopped as the team got closer to their target. Sloane checked her medical station for the 4th time. She had stretchers ready, intravenous bags hanging, and her surgical kit open to treat multiple patients quickly. She had learned that difficult lesson in Afghanistan. Always hope for the best, but you have to be prepared for the worst. Because hope cannot stop a person from bleeding to death. At 10 in the evening, the silence shattered. "Contact! Contact! We are under fire!" The radio erupted with a confusing mix of voices. She could hear gunfire in the background. It was not the controlled sound of a well-planned attack. It was the complete chaos of a mission that had gone terribly wrong. Hawkins's voice broke through the chaos. "Entry team, sound off. We are pinned down. The intelligence was bad. There are more than 20 hostiles here." She heard a loud explosion, probably from a rocket-propelled grenade. Then she heard the words she always feared. "Frost is hit! Frost is down!" Sloane jumped to her feet, every muscle in her body tensing. Every part of her wanted to run, to help, to do something. But she was 12 kilometers away and totally powerless. Then Hawkins was on the radio. "Doc, we need you right now." "Vehicle 2 is on its way to you." "Sir, I am on my way," she answered. She grabbed her medical bag. It weighed 60 pounds, not as heavy as her full pack, but it contained all the essential life-saving gear. The truck sped into camp, and Sloane was jumping in before it came to a complete stop. "Go!" she shouted at the driver. They raced across the open desert. There were no roads, just rocks, sand, and absolute darkness. The driver navigated through the dark with night vision goggles. Sloane gripped the door handle, her hands identifying every piece of medical gear by feel alone. She located the tourniquets, the clotting gauze, and the intravenous kits. They travelled 12 kilometers in just 8 minutes. The truck could not get any closer without being seen. She had to cover the final kilometer on her own. Sloane jumped out of the still-moving truck, breaking into a run the second her boots hit the ground. The 60 pounds of equipment she was carrying felt like nothing. The surge of adrenaline was a powerful fuel. Just up ahead, she could hear the sounds of the firefight. She saw the flashes from the muzzles and could tell the difference between the sound of AK-47s and the deeper reports of American M4s. When she got to the team, they were taking cover behind a low wall. Frost was lying on his back, and a large, dark red patch was spreading quickly on his upper leg. It was a bad femoral wound, very close to the main artery. He probably had 90 seconds left before he went into shock. With less than 2 minutes before he would be gone, Sloane dove across the ground to get to his side. Bullets zipped just inches over their heads. She did not even flinch. Her entire world shrunk to the patient, the wound, and the job she had to do. "Frost," she said, "look at me. You are going to be okay." His eyes were wide with terror. "Doc, I cannot feel my leg." "You are losing blood. I am about to stop that. Just hang in there." She took a tourniquet from her medical bag. Her hands moved with a familiar speed that came from endless practice. She put it high on his thigh, far above the wound. In the field, it was the only way to treat this kind of bleeding. She wrapped it one time around his leg. She passed the strap through the buckle and tightened it with all her might. Then she put the windlass rod into its slot. This was the most critical part. She twisted the rod one complete turn. She turned it a second time, and the band squeezed tighter. It dug into his muscle, putting pressure on the artery. Frost screamed in pain. Sloane continued to turn. 3 rotations, then a 4th. The bright red blood that had been gushing out started to slow. It became a weak trickle. Then, finally, it stopped. She locked the windlass rod into its clip. She looked at the wound again. The bleeding was under control. She felt for a pulse below the tourniquet. There was not one. That was a very good sign. Her hands moved perfectly, applying the tourniquet. It was done in only 19 seconds from the time she got to him. At last the bleeding was controlled. "You are stable for now." Frost struggled to breathe in short gasps. "The pain is so bad," he managed to say. "That only means you're still with us. Living is hard, dying is simple." She quickly started an intravenous line, pushing combat fluids to stop his blood pressure from dropping. "You will be all right." Just then more shots rang out, feeling much closer this time. Hawkins dropped into place beside her. "We have to leave this spot. The enemy is moving around to our side. Is he able to walk?" "No, he will have to be carried." "Doc, they are still firing on us. We are completely trapped here." The following shots came from a totally new direction, a rooftop about 280 meters out. Sloane saw the flash from the rifle's muzzle. She noted the high angle. She realized that shooter had a clear view of Hawkins. Time seemed to slow down, just like her father described in his old war stories. Her sight became razor sharp and clear. The enemy sniper was taking his time. He was a trained professional. Hawkins had no idea he was in danger. He was busy with Frost, leaving himself completely exposed. The shot was going to happen in the next 5 seconds. Frost's M4 rifle lay just 3 feet from her, right where it fell. The gun had a normal scope, a full clip of ammunition, and the safety was off. Sloane looked at the rifle, then at Hawkins, then back toward the rooftop. She could almost feel her father's voice, like he was right next to her. "When the time comes, you can't think, you just have to act. Thinking will get you killed." Then she heard the voice of her mother. "Make me a promise. Promise me you will not touch a gun ever again." She thought of Morrison's question. "What will you do?" Sloane reached out her hand and grabbed the rifle. Her hands felt like they were moving by themselves. It was all muscle memory, a skill she had learned from thousands of hours of practice. It was something taught to her when she was a young girl. She checked the chamber and saw a bullet was ready. She looked through the scope. She calculated the distance and the wind. 280 meters. The target was high up. A soft wind was coming from the east. The bullet would barely fall at that distance with a 5.56 millimeter round. She brought the rifle up to her shoulder. It felt natural, like an extension of her own body. It was like she had come home. The gunny saw her. "Doc, what in the world are you doing?" Sloane's entire focus shrank to the image in the scope. Nothing existed but the crosshair and the target. An enemy sniper, just a dark shape against the fading light. He was kneeling, and she could clearly see his rifle barrel. She took control of her breathing. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 7, breathe out for 8. Her pulse began to slow. She would take the shot in the silent moment between her heartbeats. For 1 flawless, quiet second, the man was perfectly lined up in her sights. Hawkins looked over and saw the weapon aimed near him. Barrett Sloane pulled the trigger, a smooth motion just like her father had shown her. The rifle pushed back into her shoulder. The bullet traveled for 2.1 seconds. The enemy sniper was knocked backward and disappeared from the rooftop. A sudden calm fell over their location. Shooting continued far away. Men were shouting in Arabic, and Stone was shooting back. But for their team, everything became still. Frost could only look on in shock. "Oh my goodness, did that really just happen?" Sloane gently placed the rifle back down. She went to Frost's side to check on him. His pulse was 110. His blood pressure was holding. "You have to be evacuated, but you are stable for now." Hawkins was stuck in place. He looked from the now empty rooftop to Sloane. "How did you learn to shoot that well?" Sloane looked him in the eye. "My father was my teacher, sir." "That was a shot from 280 meters away." "Yes, sir, I am aware. It was a target on the move, and you were being shot at." "Yes, sir." Gunny moved closer. "Who on earth is your father?" Sloane waited for 3 very long seconds. This was the secret she had held for 11 years. It was the reality she had tried to escape. It was the family history she never wanted. Gunnery Sergeant Michael Barrett, a Marine Scout sniper. Gunny's face went pale as he recognized the name. He was old enough to know about the man, Mike Barrett. The one and only Mike Barrett. He was a true legend in Helmand Province. Sloane simply gave a slow nod. Oh my goodness. Gunny glanced from the rifle to Sloane, and then back to the roof. He was the one who taught you? For 4 years, from the time I was 12 to when I was 16, and you decided to be a medic. I gave my mother my word I would not use a gun after he passed away. I broke that word today. Hawkins was struggling to understand everything. You just saved my life. I was just performing my duty, sir. My duty is to make sure every person on this team stays alive. Your duty is to be a medic. Sloane inspected Frost's injury, then the clear liquid in the intravenous bag. I took care of that duty as well. Another round of gunfire served as a reminder of their ongoing danger. Hawkins quickly made a call. We are moving from this spot immediately. Stone. You and Gunny put Frost on a stretcher. Barrett, you are coming with me. We will provide cover as we pull back. Sir, I need to be with Frost. You just said that Frost is stable. What I need now is a person who can hit a target from 300 meters out. Are you able to handle that? Sloane grabbed the rifle and inspected its action one more time. Yes, sir. They began to move back. It was a planned retreat, a kind of organized confusion. Stone and Gunny held the stretcher with Frost on it. Sloane and Hawkins watched their backs. An enemy team appeared suddenly from the east. 4 men were making their way through the destroyed buildings. Sloane was the first to see them. Enemy spotted to the right, 150 meters. 4 of them. She lifted her rifle. She let off 2 quick shots for each of the men. She was aiming for the middle of their torsos. 1 is down, 2 are down. In just 4 seconds, all 4 of the enemy soldiers were gone. Hawkins could only look at her with total astonishment. Where have you been hiding this whole time? Right here in the open, sir. They reached the vehicles. They put Frost inside and requested a medical evacuation helicopter. It was on its way and would arrive in about 10 minutes. While they waited, Sloane cared for Frost. She checked the tourniquet again and applied a clean bandage. She looked for any sign of dangerous swelling and managed his IV drip. She kept talking to him to make sure he stayed awake. Doc, Frost said quietly, I am truly sorry I ever doubted you. You had good cause to doubt me. I had not yet earned your respect. You definitely have earned it now. You would have done the exact same for me. The helicopter came down in a whirl of dust and sand. They carefully carried Frost onto it. The helicopter lifted off and vanished into the dark sky. The team sat in the quiet, the rush from the battle slowly wearing off. Stone came over to Sloane. He carried his own sniper rifle on his back. That first shot you took, the sniper at 280 meters, I also had him in my sights. I was just about to fire when your shot went off. It was a perfect hit, straight through his middle. Thank you, Senior Chief. Do not give me thanks, but answer me this. Before this night, how many times have you fired in a real battle? Sloane took a second to consider. She thought of all the long training sessions with her father. There were so many of them. She had fired thousands of rounds in practice. But in an actual conflict, in a real conflict, tonight was the very first time. Stone stood completely still. Your first ever shot in combat was from 280 meters, at a moving target while being fired upon, and you succeeded on your first attempt? Yes, Senior Chief. Mike Barrett was a very good instructor. Yes, he certainly was. A memory seemed to appear on Stone's face. I met your father one time. It was during a joint training event in 2011 at Camp Pendleton. He was the most gifted shooter I had ever witnessed. He mentioned to me that he was teaching his daughter how to shoot. He said you possessed a truly special talent for it. He even claimed you were better than him at your age." Sloane felt a tightness building in her throat. "Did he actually say that? He was extremely proud of you. He told me you had the most stable hands he had ever seen on someone so young. He said you had a natural talent for the math it required." Stone paused for a second. "He also told me you promised to never use that gift, that you had chosen a path to heal people, not to fight them." "I did, but everything changed tonight. Your father would have understood. He would have demanded it. He taught you to protect others, and that is precisely what you did." They drove back to the camp in complete silence. Sloane was trapped in her own thoughts, feeling the crushing weight of her choice. She had gone back on her word. She had used the deadly skills her father taught her. She had ended a man's life. The logical part of her brain knew there was no other way. Hawkins would be dead if she had not fired. Perhaps Frost, too. But that logic did nothing to lift the heavy burden from her heart. Back at the camp, Hawkins called for a debriefing. "Let us go over what happened out there. The intelligence we were given was completely wrong. We encountered far more enemy combatants than we anticipated. Frost took a hit. Doc saved him with a tourniquet in under 20 seconds. Then she saved my life with a shot that I did not even see coming. After that, she covered our extraction and took out 4 more hostiles." He turned and looked straight at Sloane. "Barrett, your file says you have 0 combat experience." "I do not, sir. I have only ever treated combat wounds. That is a completely different skill set." "Well, not any more." Hawkins crossed his arms over his chest. "This is what I have to know. Can you do that again if we need you to?" Sloane held his gaze. "Yes, sir." "Without hesitating?" "Without hesitation." Hawkins gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "In that case, we must find out what you are truly capable of. What I witnessed tonight suggests your skills are far beyond what we knew." Stone finally spoke. "Commander, I ask for permission to formally test the Doc's marksmanship. We must know who is on our team." "I agree. Tomorrow morning at 0800. A complete evaluation." Hawkins glanced at the rest of his team. "Does anyone in this room have a problem with that?" The entire room was perfectly still. The doubt from 2 weeks prior was completely gone. In its place was only curiosity and a new, profound respect. Gunny slowly raised his hand. "I have only one question for you, Doc. Why would you hide it? Why did you not tell us you had that kind of skill?" Sloane took a deep breath. "Because when my father died, I promised my mother I would never touch a firearm again. I joined the Navy to save lives, not take them. I honored that promise for 11 years. I broke it tonight because I could not just stand by and watch Commander Hawkins die. I will need to figure out how to live with my choice, and how to explain it to my mother. But if I had to choose all over again, I would do the exact same thing." "Do you believe your mother will understand?" Gunny asked. "I am not certain, Chief," she replied, "but I truly hope she does." The team members separated, worn out and still trying to comprehend what they had just seen. Beneath the dark sky, Sloane stared at her phone, her mother's name glowing on the screen. She simply could not bring herself to make the call yet. She had no idea what to say. Instead, she dialed Morrison, who picked up on the first ring. He said, "Sloane, I heard what happened. Hawkins called me about an hour ago. He asked me all about Mike teaching you. I told him the whole story." Morrison paused for a second, then continued, "So, you finally broke your promise." Sloane confirmed that she did, and then she told him everything. She described Garrett's heat stroke, Frost's wounded leg, the sniper on the rooftop, the shot she took, and their chaotic escape. When she finished, Morrison was quiet for a moment. He finally said, Your father trained you for this exact situation, Sloane. He did not want you to become a killer. He wanted you to be a protector. You protected your team from harm tonight. That was always his wish. That is what all of those years of training were really for. When Sloane mentioned her mother, Morrison offered some comfort. Your mother is a lot stronger than you think. She was married to a Marine, and she knew what that life required. She understands what is necessary. His voice became softer. Mike would be so incredibly proud of you. He praised her for the shots she took, the lives she saved, and the choice she was forced to make. He told her, "I am proud of you." Sloane admitted that it did not feel like a moment for pride. Morrison understood completely. It never does. Not the first time. It never really does, to be honest. But you learn to live with it, because the alternative is living with the ghosts of the teammates you could have saved. You understand that now. Sloane closed her eyes. "I understand," she replied. He told her to get some rest, because her test was scheduled for the next day. He urged her to show them everything Mike taught her, and to stop hiding her skills. She just replied, "Yes, sir." Morrison then added, "And Sloane, you really ought to call your mother. She needs to hear it from you before she hears it from someone else." After they hung up, Sloane sat alone in the darkness for another hour before she worked up the courage to make the call. Her mother answered her phone on the fourth ring. It was late in California, well after midnight. She asked, "Sloane, is everything all right?" Sloane answered, "Mum, there is something I have to tell you." A silent moment hung between them. Then her mother said, "You used a gun." It was not a question, but a statement of a mother's intuition. Sloane asked how she knew. Her mother replied, "I know my own daughter, and I have always thought this day might arrive. Just tell me what happened." So Sloane told her the whole story, keeping it brief but completely honest. When she finished speaking, her mother was quiet for a very long time. Sloane could hear her soft breathing, and maybe the sound of silent tears. Sloane apologized. "Mum, I am so very sorry. I know that I broke my promise." But her mother's voice was firm when she finally spoke. "Stop that right now. You made that promise to me when you were a 16-year-old girl, just after your father died. You were just a child. You are not a child any longer. You are a woman who saved lives tonight. You are your father's daughter, someone who can heal and someone who can protect," Sloane said. "But I killed a person." Her mother gently corrected her. "No, you protected a person. There is a huge difference. Your reason for acting is what truly matters. The situation matters. You did not do it from a place of anger or for entertainment. You did it because your commander was about to die." Her mother's voice shook just a little. "Your father taught you how to do that because he knew this moment could happen, that you might have to make this decision. He would be so proud of you for making the right choice." Tears began to stream down Sloane's face as she whispered, "I miss him so much, Mum." Her mother's voice grew tender. "I do too, my dear, every day, but he is still with you." "He is in your skill, in the choice you made, and in the people you saved." After a small pause, she said, "I am so proud of you. I worry, but I am proud." Sloane said, "I love you, Mum." Her mother answered, "I love you too. Now, please, just make sure you come home safely." And then the call was over. Sloane sat alone in the quiet of the desert night. She let herself cry, releasing all the grief and relief that she had kept locked inside. When she was done, she wiped her tears away, took a long drink of water, and went to check on Garrett one final time. The next day they would test her skills, to see what her father had spent 4 patient years teaching her. Tomorrow she would let them see everything she could do. The time for hiding was over. She was truly her father's daughter, a skilled medic and a deadly sharpshooter. The morning came far too early. Sloane had been up since 5 o'clock, getting very little rest. By 8 o'clock, the entire firing range was set up. Targets stood at various distances, from 600 meters to 800, then 1,000, and even further if necessary. Stone was there waiting with an M40, a 5 rifle. The whole team had gathered to observe. This was clearly more than a test. It was a performance. The commander wants to see what you are capable of, so that is our mission today, Stone said as he handed her the weapon. Are you familiar with this particular rifle system? Sloane replied, Yes, Senior Chief. My father had an M40, A3. It is the same platform, just an older generation. This is the A5. It has a different stock and scope, but the core mechanics are the same. Stone gave a slight nod. Understood. Your first shot is at 600 meters. We have a mild breeze, maybe 5 miles per hour coming from the west. Show us what you can do. Sloane accepted the rifle, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. She moved into a prone position, deployed the bipod, and rested her cheek on the stock. She looked through the scope and began a controlled breathing cycle. The target appeared in sharp focus. She mentally calculated the wind's effect and the bullet's drop at 600 meters. Then she made a small adjustment to the scope. Her finger found the trigger. She timed her shot with the calm pause between her heartbeats. That perfect moment of stillness. She squeezed. Stone, who was watching through a spotting scope, announced, Center mass. A perfect shot. Let us try again. 800 meters. Sloane adjusted her scope once more, making new calculations. The bullet would drop significantly more at this range, and the wind would have a much bigger impact. She fired the shot. He announced, A hit to the upper torso. Stone's voice was calm and professional. 1,000 meters. Let us see if you can handle that. 1,000 meters was more than half a mile away. At such a distance, the environment itself becomes a major challenge. Shooting is less about science and more about instinct. Sloane had practiced this exact kind of shot with her father in New Mexico, in a place she knew like the back of her hand. This new location presented a challenge with its different altitude and air pressure. Sloane did not rush. She carefully watched the heat waves rising off the desert floor through her scope, using them to map the wind's entire path. She calculated the bullet's trajectory. It would fall nearly 60 inches at this distance. After a large scope adjustment, she kept her breathing even and her heart rate under control. She found the perfect moment of calm between two heartbeats, a small sliver of time that felt like it lasted forever. She fired. The bullet flew for 2 very long seconds. It cut a high path over half a mile of desert landscape. Stone was silent, watching carefully through his scope. After 5 seconds, he finally spoke. Dead center. A flawless shot. Behind them, Gunny let out a low whistle and said, Good heavens, Doc. Hawkins walked over and asked, Barrett, be straight with me. What is your farthest effective range? What is the longest shot you have ever successfully made? She answered, While training with my father, I made confirmed hits at 1,200 meters, sir. I could do it again and again. 1,200 meters. Hawkins shot a look at Stone. That is world-class skill. That is far beyond what most military snipers can do. Stone added, Our best guys are hitting targets at 800 to 1,000 meters. Hitting 1,200 meters requires immense talent, the best gear, and perfect weather. And she is hitting 1,000 meters with a strange rifle? Sloane said softly, My father taught me to be patient. Hawkins processed the new information. This changes everything for us. Stone explained the situation. We have a medic who is also a sharpshooter of the highest caliber. We must find a way to use both of her skills. The challenge is making sure one role does not interfere with the other. Then he gave his idea. We can give her 2 official roles, combat medic and designated marksman. This idea has been discussed at high levels before, we just never had someone who could fill both roles, until today. What are your thoughts on that, Barrett? Hawkins asked. Sloane put her rifle down and looked at her team. These were the men who had dismissed her just 3 weeks earlier. Now, their faces held only professional respect. Sir, I joined the Navy to save people. That will always come first for me, but I have realized that sometimes saving lives means you must remove a threat. I am willing to serve this team in the most effective way possible. If that means I need to perform both jobs, then I will. Hawkins glanced at Stone, Gunny, and the others. He said, "Let us have a show of hands. Who here supports Barrett as our combat medic and our designated marksman?" In an instant, every hand in the room went up. "Then that settles it," Hawkins declared. "Barrett, this is happening right now. You are officially the team's medic and our backup marksman. Stone will remain the primary sniper. You will handle medical needs and also deliver accurate fire when required. We will adjust our strategies to take advantage of both your talents." He paused for a moment. "You will need more training in advanced techniques, like reading the wind, hitting moving targets, and shooting in dark conditions. Stone is going to lead your training." She replied simply, "Yes, sir." Hawkins added one last thing, and his expression softened slightly. "Your father was a remarkable instructor, Barrett. I am deeply sorry that you had to break your promise to him, but I am also extremely grateful that you did." Sloane could only give a nod, a tight feeling in her throat, stopping any words. The team began to disperse. Only Stone remained behind. He said, "Your advanced lessons begin tomorrow. We will work on long-range weather factors, engaging moving targets, and night operations. I am sure your father taught you these things, but we will make it official." She answered, "Thank you, Senior Chief." He replied, "Do not thank me yet. I am not an easy instructor, but you have the strongest foundation I have ever witnessed outside our elite units. We will build upon that." Stone started to walk away, but then he paused and turned back. He said, "Your father said something to me. The last time I saw him, back in 2011, he told me, 'I am not teaching my daughter to be a killer. I am teaching her to be a protector. One day someone will need her protection, and she will be the only one who can give it. I want her to have that choice.'" Stone looked her directly in the eye. "You faced that choice last night, and you made the right one. That is all he ever wanted for you." Sloane watched him leave, alone with the rifle and her thoughts. For 11 years she had hidden this ability. That was over now. She was Sloane Barrett, daughter of Gunnery Sergeant Michael Barrett, a hospital corpsman first class, and now a warrior. Her father had given her 2 very different skill sets. She was finally ready to use them both. 3 weeks after rescuing the contractors, they received new orders. It was a mission with extreme risk. An American journalist had been taken captive near the Turkish border. His name was Thomas Whitfield, a freelancer reporting on the refugee crisis. The intel suggested he would be executed in 48 hours. This operation was going to be different from the last. Sloane would not be staying behind at the base this time. Hawkins gathered the team and announced, "We are leaving at 0400 tomorrow. The briefing is at 2000 tonight, followed by a full rehearsal. This mission will be very challenging. The location is difficult, and there are civilians nearby. The rules of engagement are going to be incredibly strict." Then he looked at Sloane. "Have you ever heard a story about a mission that seemed impossible from the start?" Barrett's team thought they were ready, but they were headed straight into a trap. This is the story of how one secret skill ended up saving them all. The mission briefing that evening laid out all the dangers. The enemy was hiding deep inside a long valley. A small town was situated not far from them. Intelligence reports indicated 15 to 20 hostiles, a combination of local militia and outside fighters. Their hostage, Whitfield, had been seen alive only 12 hours earlier. The report said he was scheduled to be executed at noon the next day. This gave them a very brief window to act. Hawkins pointed at a map of the region. A helicopter will drop us off 2 kilometers to the north. Stone will set up his sniper post right here, 800 meters from the target building. The 6-person entry team will move in on foot. You will breach the compound walls at 0700 just as the sun rises. Your objective is to rescue Whitfield and get out. You will have a maximum of 90 minutes on the ground. Stone examined the map and saw a major issue. There is only one road leading into and out of this valley. If they see us coming, they can easily block our escape route. There is a secondary exit route, 3 kilometers to the northwest. The helicopter will need a 20-minute warning before it can arrive for pickup. Frost then put his hand up. What is Whitfield's medical condition? We have no exact information. We have to assume he is injured, possibly from torture. He may not be able to walk on his own. Barrett, be prepared to provide medical care and stabilize him quickly. Yes, sir. There is one more thing. A grim expression appeared on Hawkins's face. Our sources believe one of the guards could be a former military sniper with possible Russian training. We must consider this an extremely high-threat situation. Stone and Barrett, you need to be ready for a potential sniper duel. The team practiced their plan until midnight. They rehearsed breaching the building, evacuating a casualty, and what to do if things went wrong. They ran through every step until it was automatic. At 3 in the morning, Sloane made a final check of her gear. Her medical bag alone weighed 40 pounds. It was packed with tourniquets, bandages, intravenous bags, and everything needed to save a life. Her M4 rifle was ready, with 4 extra magazines carrying 150 rounds. Her Beretta M9 pistol was secured at her side. With her armor and other equipment, she carried a total of 110 pounds. She had carried this much weight before, and she was prepared to do it again on this night. The helicopter flight was surprisingly quiet. It stayed low and dark to avoid being seen. They touched down in a dry riverbed, 2 kilometers from their target. The instant they stepped out, the helicopter disappeared into the night. A profound silence settled over the desert. Stone immediately split off, moving like a phantom toward his sniper position on the ridge. The rest of the team, Hawkins, Gunny, Frost, Garrett, Dixon, and Sloane, began their trek to the compound. The journey took 40 minutes. They moved with slow, careful steps, using the darkness as their cover. At 06:45, they reached the compound wall. Stone's voice suddenly came through the radio. "I am in position. I have a view of the target. My thermal scope is showing. Hold on a second. I see a lot more hostiles than we anticipated. My count is between 25 and 30 individuals, not the 15 to 20 we were briefed on." Hawkins froze. "Repeat that. 30. I confirm a count of 30 people. A couple of cars just arrived. It seems like they brought reinforcements." The intelligence was completely wrong. Sloane felt a tight knot of fear form in her gut. More enemies meant much greater danger. It meant a higher chance of someone on her team getting hurt. Hawkins made the call. "We are proceeding with the mission. Whitfield dies if we pull out now. Entry team, prepare for a much more intense fight. Stone, your job is to eliminate anyone who tries to block our exit. Barrett, you stay right with me." They positioned themselves at the door they were going to breach. Frost was in front with the explosive charge. Gunny was behind him, followed by Hawkins, and then Sloane. Frost set the charge on the door. Everyone backed away to a safe position. He gave a hand signal for the countdown. 3, 2, 1. The blast ripped the door from its frame in a spray of dust and splintered wood. The team flooded into the building. The first room was empty. In the second, 2 men were grabbing for their weapons. Gunny and Frost dropped them before they could fire a single shot. In the third room they found Whitfield. He was tied to a chair. His face was badly bruised, and his shirt was soaked with blood, but he was alive and conscious. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw the American soldiers. "We have the package," Hawkins reported into his radio. Sloane hurried to Whitfield's side. She performed a quick assessment of his wounds. He seemed to have broken ribs and numerous cuts on his face. He was extremely weak, but could walk with help. She sliced through the ropes that held him. "Can you walk?" he whispered. "I think so." "Stay right behind me." In that same moment, their world exploded into chaos. A rocket-propelled grenade shattered the window, and the force of the blast threw Sloane against a wall. A loud ringing sound filled her ears as her vision became blurry. She quickly checked herself for wounds. Her limbs were unhurt, with no blood. She was prepared to fight. But Garrett was down. Sloane crawled to his side. His left leg had a terrible wound high up on his thigh, dangerously close to the major artery. Bright red blood pumped out with each beat of his heart. Her first reaction was a feeling of tired recognition, but this time was different. This time she knew precisely what she had to do. She reached into her pack for a tourniquet, her hands moving with skilled certainty. This was the third time she had treated this exact injury, and the steps were now automatic. She wrapped the band high and tight around Garrett's leg and pulled the strap with all her strength. After threading it through the buckle, she began to twist the tightening rod. Garrett's face contorted in pain, but he made no sound. He understood this awful procedure was the only thing keeping him alive. Sloane continued to twist the rod with complete focus. With every rotation, the pressure increased, pinching the artery closed. The strong flow of blood slowed down to a trickle, and then it stopped altogether. She secured the rod in place and noted the time. The entire life-saving procedure had taken her just 16 seconds. "You are going to be okay." She had to start an intravenous line, but there was no time for that now. A sudden spray of gunfire erupted from outside. It was the clear sound of a heavy machine gun. Stone's voice came over the radio. "You have enemy fire coming from every direction. I count more than 30 hostiles. A machine gun is positioned on the roof of the north building, about 380 meters from you. I do not have a clear shot from where I am. The other buildings are blocking my line of sight." Hawkins quickly assessed their terrible situation. Garrett was stable, but could not move. Whitfield was injured, but was able to walk. They were trapped by 30 enemies and a powerful machine gun. "We have to take out that gun, or we will not make it out of here alive." Sloane looked carefully through the window. She could see the north building and the two-man team on its roof. Stone could not make the shot. She knew she was the only other person on the team who carried a precision rifle. "Commander, I have a clear view of the machine gun nest." Hawkins looked from her to Garrett. "You have to stay with the wounded man." "Garrett is stable for the moment, sir." "The tourniquet's working. But none of us are safe while that gun is still firing." Hawkins knew she was correct. "Take the shot." Sloane moved into position by the window and brought up her M4 rifle. Looking through her scope, she estimated the distance. It was 380 meters. There was almost no wind. She figured her bullet would drop about 18 inches over that distance. The gunner was mostly protected behind a metal shield. She could only see his head and the upper part of his chest. It was a very small target and a very tough shot. But it was not an impossible one. She calmed her breathing, waited for the quiet space between breaths, and gently squeezed the trigger. The machine gunner was thrown backward and collapsed, but a second man immediately moved to replace him and began shooting again. Sloane made a very small adjustment to her aim. The new gunner was being much more cautious and was showing less of himself. She fired a second time. The bullet created a spark as it hit the gun's metal frame. It was a complete miss. The gunner ducked down even lower. Sloane followed his movement aimed just ahead of him, and fired her third shot. It was a perfect hit. The second gunner dropped. The heavy machine gun stopped firing. "Gun is down," Stone reported over the radio. "That was some amazing shooting, Doc. Entry team, we need to move now." Hawkins helped Whitfield get up. Gunny and Frost put Garrett onto a temporary carrier. "Barrett, you are with me. Watch our back." They began to move out, carrying Garrett on a stretcher they made from a door and some rope. Sloan and Hawkins provided covering fire as the team pulled back. Behind them, the compound fell into complete chaos. Enemies began rushing out from all directions. The team had to battle their way across 200 meters of open terrain. Sloan shot at targets as they came into view, firing in controlled, short bursts. She never stayed in one place, just like her father had taught her. Fire and then move. Never let yourself become an easy target. They finally made it to the pre-planned rally point. They found a moment of safety behind a group of large rocks, 400 meters away from the compound. Sloane's immediate priority was to check on Garrett. The tourniquet was still secure. She started the intravenous line she did not have time for earlier. His face was pale, but he was conscious. Whitfield was leaning against a rock, breathing heavily. Sloane quickly checked his condition. She asked him, "How do you feel?" He answered in a weak voice, "Like I have been beaten and not fed for 4 days." That sounds about right, she thought. She offered him water and instructed him to take only very small sips. Hawkins got on his radio, telling command they required an emergency pickup at Landing Zone Alpha. He reported that they had 2 wounded men. The reply was that a helicopter was coming and would arrive in 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. They needed to hold on for 10 more minutes. Suddenly, Stone's voice, full of pain, came through the radio. "I am hit," he said with a gasp. "It is my right shoulder. I can no longer provide any covering fire." In that moment, they lost their sniper. At that exact time, the enemy began to advance on them again. Through her scope, Sloane could see them clearly. A group of 8 men was moving toward them. They were only 200 meters away, and getting closer, very fast. The team was in a horrible situation. Garrett was injured, and Whitfield could barely stand. Stone, their expert shooter, was now wounded. It was not possible to fight effectively while also protecting their injured men. Someone needed to stop the enemy from advancing. Sloane knew that person was her. "Commander, I will set up a defensive position here. I can hold them back while you get the others to the helicopter." "That is not going to happen. I need you with the injured men." "Sir, Garrett is stable, and Whitfield can last a little while longer. But if that enemy squad reaches us before the helicopter does, none of us are getting out of here. Just give me 1 minute. I will slow them down, and then I will retreat back to you." Hawkins knew she was right, but he did not like the plan. "You have 60 seconds, Barrett. After that, you run." It was a direct command. "Yes, sir," she said. Sloane grabbed 2 extra magazines from Frost's gear. She located a solid defensive position about 150 meters away from her team. The spot offered her good protection and a clear view of the enemy. She lay down, deploying the stand on her M4 rifle. She had 90 rounds available, with more in her Beretta M9 pistol. 8 hostiles were moving forward, now at a distance of 180 meters. She picked her first target, the man at the front of the group. She fired 2 rounds into his chest, and he fell to the ground immediately. The other 7 were well trained and quickly found cover. They returned fire, and their bullets chipped away at the rocks that protected her. Sloane stayed perfectly calm. She found her next target, fired, and a second man went down. She checked her watch. 15 seconds were gone. She had only 45 seconds left. The 6 hostiles moved in perfect coordination. 3 swung left to get on her flank. while 3 advanced on her right. It was a standard attack formation. Sloane chose the group on her left. She fired 2 quick rounds at each soldier. 1 went down, another was injured, and the third scrambled for cover. The group on the right seized the moment to rush forward. They were now just 100 meters away, far too close for comfort. Sloane scrambled 20 meters to the right, opening up a new line of fire. The enemy kept shooting at her old location, reacting too slowly. From her new spot, she turned her attention to the group on the right. There were 3 of them, now only 70 meters from her. She fired in controlled shots. The first, second, and third all dropped. 30 seconds were left on the clock. Only 3 of the original 8 remained, and they were staying out of sight. They were proceeding very cautiously now. From behind her she heard the amazing sound of the incoming helicopter. That was the sound of her rescue. 15 seconds to go. One of the final 3 enemies moved. He was carrying a large object. Through her scope, Sloane knew exactly what it was. It was a rocket launcher. He was preparing to take down the chopper. He was moving, now 240 meters away. She had only moments before he took his shot. If that rocket connected with the helicopter, it would mean the end for everyone. Sloane instantly calculated the wind, the distance, and the moving target. She took one last deep breath and found a moment of absolute focus. She gently squeezed the trigger. The man with the launcher fell to the ground. The weapon fell uselessly beside him. The helicopter landed without incident at the extraction point. Now it was her turn to move. Sloane bolted from her cover and ran for the helicopter. It was a 150-meter sprint wearing full combat gear. Every single muscle in her legs screamed in protest. The last 2 enemies fired at her, with bullets whistling past her ears. They were close, but none of them hit their mark. She ran with everything she had, zigzagging to make herself a more difficult target. 50 meters left, Gunny showed up at the helicopter door. "Go, Doc, go!" 25 meters to go. She was the only one left standing. Gunny grabbed her arm and yanked her onto the chopper. The helicopter rose instantly, tilting hard as it picked up speed and height. Sloane fell to the floor, fighting for each breath. With the fight over, her entire body started to shake. Garrett watched from his stretcher, his face a mask of pure awe. Doc just fought off 8 enemies all by herself. "Only 5, Sloane corrected him, still struggling to breathe. "I only fought 5. The other 3 ran away." Frost just shook his head in disbelief. "That last shot, the one with the rocket. You were moving and still made the shot from 240 meters. Sloane offered a tired smile. "You do what you must when there is no other option." Hawkins knelt down next to her. "You saved all of us again." Sloane was too worn out to answer. The reality of what she had just done was beginning to sink in. The brutal violence, the men she had taken down, and the horrible reason behind it all. But her team was safe. Garrett, Whitfield, and the others were alive because she did what had to be done. Stone was sitting up against the wall, his right shoulder drenched in blood. Sloane made herself get to her feet. "Senior Chief, I need to look at that shoulder. I am all right, Doc." "You are not all right until I say you are. Let me see it." She carefully cut the material of his uniform sleeve. The bullet went in, making a small, neat hole, but it did not come out the other side. The round was lodged inside him. A clean shot through would have been much simpler. "This needs to stay in place until a surgeon can remove it," she explained. She cleaned the wound with saline solution, packed it with gauze to control the bleeding, and wrapped it tightly. Stone gritted his teeth from the pain, but remained silent. "You will need an operation to get that bullet out, but you are not going to bleed to death. It looks like the nerves and arteries are fine." She tied off the final bandage. "You should be able to use a rifle again in about 6 weeks." "6 weeks?" Stone's expression hardened. "Doc, I have to be ready in 3. Take the full 6 weeks," she ordered, or you risk permanent damage to your arm. The choice is yours, Senior Chief. Stone gave a slow nod. 6 weeks it is. The helicopter carried them back to the main base. Garrett and Stone were taken straight to surgery. Whitfield was sent for a medical evaluation and to give his report. The rest of the team went to clean their equipment and write their own mission reports. Sloane was left alone in the medical station, trying to deal with the terrible weight of her actions. Admiral Morrison showed up 2 days later. The team gathered in their dress uniforms for a formal meeting. When Morrison walked into the room, everyone stood at sharp attention. "Please, have a seat," he said, walking to the front. "I have reviewed the reports from your last mission, and what I have read is nothing short of extraordinary." He looked at every member of the team, and his eyes finally came to rest on Sloane. In the past month, Petty Officer Barrett has saved 4 lives with her medical training. She has also eliminated 9 enemy fighters, defended a position by herself against a larger force, and made the rescue of an American journalist possible. Morrison then walked over to stand right in front of Sloane. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Michael Barrett, was one of the best Marines I ever served with. He taught his daughter about a lot more than just shooting. He taught her what it means to serve and to protect. He taught her that saving someone can sometimes mean using force, and that this force can be a form of healing. He paused for a second. When Mike passed away 11 years ago, Sloane gave her mother her word she would never use a firearm again. She honored that promise for 11 years. She broke it 3 weeks ago to save her commander. She has broken it many times since then to protect her teammates and to complete the mission. Morrison's voice softened. Mike would have understood. In fact, he would have insisted on it. He gave her those skills because he knew she might face a day just like this. And I am certain her teammates are grateful for that choice every single time. He looked directly into Sloane's eyes. Your father did not raise you to be a killer, Petty Officer Barrett. He raised you to be a protector. You are honoring his lessons with every single thing you do. Morrison then took out a folder with official documents. Effective today, I am recommending you for a dual classification as both a combat medic and a sharpshooter. This will be a formal recognition of the skills you have repeatedly demonstrated. I am also putting your name in for the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for your heroic actions when you rescued Whitfield. Sloane felt a lump form in her throat. Sir, I was only doing my job. Your job now involves things that most medics are never asked to do. It involves actions that even most soldiers find difficult. Morrison gave her a slight smile. Mike would be proud of you, so very proud. The team's response was immediate. Gunny stepped forward and did something unusual. He gave her a salute, even though they were at a similar rank. It was not by the book, but the sign of respect was clear. Sloane saluted him back. Frost was next, holding out his hand. I was wrong about you, Doc. I was completely and totally wrong. You were not wrong, Frost, she said. You just did not know the whole story. You deserve this. Stone was the last one to come forward, his arm held in a sling. He handed her a small, specially made patch. It displayed a Navy SEAL trident with a medical cross on it. A red cross was in the middle, surrounded by the golden trident. It is not official, Stone said, but it is the truth. You are both. You need to accept that. That evening, Sloane sat by herself, staring at the patch, and thinking about the hard path that led her here. She thought of the promises she honored and the ones she had to break, the father she lost but still tried to live up to, and the woman she was now becoming. Her phone started to ring. It was her mother. Sloane picked up the call. Mom, I heard about it on the news, her mother said. They said an American journalist was saved in Syria. A SEAL team was there. Her mother's voice sounded hesitant. Were you a part of that team? Yes, Sloane answered. A long, quiet moment passed between them. "Are you okay?" "No, I am fine, physically." But what was the emotional toll? Sloane found it hard to describe what she went through. She said, "I am still trying to understand all of it. It is all so complicated." Her mother answered, "Your father said similar things when he came home. He always mentioned needing time to accept his actions and who he was." Her mother took a long breath. "Sloane, there is something you need to hear. I am not pleased that you broke your promise, but I get why you had to, and I am unbelievably proud of you." "I took more lives, Mum," Sloane said in a low voice. "You saved more lives," her mother gently replied. "You helped so many people as both a medic and a soldier. That is the lesson your father hoped you would understand." Her mother's voice was firm. "Your reasons are what truly count. You are not hurting people out of revenge or enjoyment. You are keeping your teammates safe. That is completely different. That is about serving a higher purpose. I just miss him so much." "I know," her mother said softly. "I miss him too." "I think about him all the time." There was a brief silence. "But he is with you in every moment, my dear. He is in the skills you possess, the decisions you make, and in every life you save, one way or another." They spoke for a little while longer. Her mother had a few questions, and Sloane told her what she could. The healing was starting for them both, as a new understanding began to replace their old grief. After she ended the call, Sloane sat in the silence for a long time. Then she made up her mind. She carefully sewed the special patch onto the sleeve of her uniform. Official or not, it showed who she really was. 6 months later, Sloane Barrett stood before a class at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. 16 students sat in front of her, a group of medics and operators, all attending the first course of this type. The course was named Integrated Combat Medicine and Tactical Shooting. It was a program she created from her own experience. "Welcome to ICMTS," she started. "This program was created because the battlefield does not care about your job title. A firefight does not care if you are a medic or a shooter. It requires you to be both. We are here to train you to be both." She then walked to the demonstration platform. A training dummy lay on the floor, and a shooting range could be seen through the windows behind it. "The first rule is simple," she said. "Taking care of your injured teammate is your number one job, always. Your primary duty is to save lives. But for your patients to make it, you must first stop the threat. Sometimes that requires you to fight first, and sometimes that means you will have to kill. Knowing how to switch between these two roles is what makes a good operator a great one." Sloane started her demonstration, showing them how to put the skills together. She treated a fake leg wound, quickly applying a tourniquet. The entire action was finished in just 19 seconds. Then, without pause, she switched to her rifle and dropped into a firing stance. She fired at a target 300 meters out, striking it perfectly. Then she was immediately back with her patient, setting up an IV line and providing medical care. The entire drill was completed in just 47 seconds. The students looked on in total silence, completely stunned. "This is not about being the top medic or the top shooter," Sloane said. "It is about being so skilled at both that your team can depend on you for either role at any time. Are there any questions?" A young corpsman, who looked like she was still a teenager, timidly raised her hand. "Petty Officer Barrett, how can you do both things? Medicine is about saving people. Combat is about taking lives. How does a person reconcile those two different worlds?" Sloane knew the question well because she had asked it herself many times. "You do not try to reconcile them," she said. "You make them into one thing. Both roles share the exact same goal, to protect your people. Sometimes that involves placing a bandage on an injury. Other times It involves stopping the person who is causing the injuries. Both of these actions are a form of service. Both are completely necessary. But what about your promise to do no harm? That promise is about never inflicting harm that is not justified. The context you are in determines everything. Letting your team get injured when you had the power to prevent it is also a form of harm. Taking one enemy life to save your entire squad is simply triage on the battlefield. We make these kinds of decisions in hospitals all the time. This is the same principle, just applied on a much larger scale. The training session continued for 6 more hours. They did hands-on practice, ran through medical scenarios, and conducted live fire training. The students learned how to shift from one way of thinking to the other in an instant. When the class was over, Sloane headed back to her office. A massive stack of paperwork was waiting on her desk. There were proposals from 3 hospitals that wanted to adopt her program, official memos about expanding it, and notes from other service women seeking her guidance. But a single email caught her eye. The subject simply said, "You have changed my entire life." It was from a corpsman by the name of Sarah Mitchell. "Petty Officer Barrett. I am attached to a Marine unit. I heard your story about being a medic who is also an expert marksman. My father was a ranger. He taught me how to shoot before he died when I was 14. I joined the Navy because I promised my mum I would be saving lives, not taking them. But your story showed me that I do not need to choose just one. I can be loyal to both parts of who I am. Thank you for showing that it is possible, for proving that a woman can handle these hard jobs without losing herself. You have genuinely changed my life." Sloane reread the email 3 separate times. She reflected on her own journey and how a single person's decisions can send ripples across the water. Her father's life sent out a ripple that eventually reached her, and now her own ripples were impacting the lives of other people. The story was moving forward. That evening, Sloane went to a shooting range with a view of the ocean. It was the very same place where new SEALs are trained, and where her dad had once stood, thinking about the great things his daughter might accomplish one day. She set up her rifle, an M4A5, for a 1,000-meter shot. A shot of this difficulty is what separates the good shooters from the legendary ones. The sun was setting, a chilly breeze was coming in off the water, and the light was quickly fading. Everything about the situation made a perfect shot seem impossible. She reviewed every single factor, adjusted for the wind, steadied her breathing, calmed her heart, and found a quiet, focused state. Then she pulled the trigger. The bullet flew for 2 seconds over more than half a mile of the evening sky. She looked through her scope. The shot was flawless, right in the bull's-eye. She whispered, "Still have it, Dad?" She could almost hear his reply, as if he were standing right there. "You always did, kiddo. You were already better than me by the time you were 16. Now you are the best there has ever been. I miss you." "I know," his voice seemed to say inside her head, "but you are not alone. You have got your team, your students, and your purpose. This is everything I ever hoped for you. Not for you to follow my path, but for you to discover your own unique way to use the skills I taught you." Sloane gathered her equipment and started the drive home. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Hawkins. "Mission briefing is at 8 o'clock tomorrow. This one will be a challenge. We are going to need every one of your skills." She smiled and texted her response. "Ready, sir?" In only the past 6 months she had been part of saving 23 lives. She had applied her medical training to prevent people from dying. Her combat abilities had kept her own team from being harmed. But the real measure was not in the numbers. It was in the people. Garrett was still here because she applied a tourniquet in just 16 seconds. Hawkins was still here because she made a 280-meter shot at the critical moment. Whitfield was back home with his family because one person knew how to patch up the injured while also fighting back the enemy. Sloane Barrett, the daughter of Michael Barrett, was a petty officer, a hospital corpsman, and a designated marksman. She was both a healer and a protector. She was not just one thing or the other. She was the ideal balance of the two. It was exactly how her father had raised her to be. Her legacy was not defined by the shots she took or the enemies she fought. It was defined by the teammates she rescued, the students she taught, and the new trail she blazed for others to walk. She demonstrated that you could unite two separate worlds, that you were not forced to pick between healing and protecting. She proved that the greatest warriors truly mastered both. The following day would bring its own difficulties, with more lives to save and more threats to overcome. It would be another opportunity to demonstrate what it means to be a complete warrior. But for tonight she was at peace. A promise she believed she had shattered was actually being honored, in a way her 16-year-old self could have never imagined. Her father would have been so incredibly proud. Her mother had come to peace with her daughter's career path. Her teammates trusted her with their very lives. Her students looked at her with immense respect. In the years to come, many more would walk the trail she blazed. They would see that serving your country comes in many forms, and that protecting people requires a wide set of talents. They would know that the best heroes could be masters of both worlds. That was Sloane Barrett. It was the person her father shaped her to be. It was the person the world needed. Someone who could heal and someone who could defend. A medic and a marksman. She was complete.